Lucky Luciano thought he could cheat Bumpy Johnson at poker and walk away clean. The cards hit the table at midnight. By sunrise, the most powerful mobster in America was running. The room was small, too small for what it held. 6 men, 1 table, enough money to buy 3 city blocks. The smoke hung thick, the kind that doesn't move unless someone opens a door. Nobody was opening doors. Lucky Luciano sat at the head of the table, crown tilted, confidence like cologne. He wore power the way other men wore suits, expensive, tailored, impossible to miss. Bumpy Johnson sat across from him. Still. The game had been going for 4 hours. Chips rose and fell. Voices stayed low. This wasn't gambling. This was negotiation with cards. Luciano dealt. His hands moved smooth, professional. The kind of dealing that comes from 10,000 games in 10,000 rooms just like this one. Bumpy watched, not the cards, the hands, the flick of the wrist, the angle of the thumb, the way Luciano's ring finger pressed just slightly too hard on the bottom of the deck. There. Subtle. Clean. Arrogant. The cheat. Bumpy's face didn't change. Didn't need to. He'd seen enough cheats to know this one was good. Italian mob good. The kind you only catch if you're looking. The kind you only pull if you think the other man won't notice, or won't matter. The hand played out. Luciano won. Of course he won. Money slid across the table. $15,000. More than some men made in 5 years. Bumpy pushed the chips forward, said nothing. Luciano smiled. That wolf smile. The one that said he knew exactly what he'd done and didn't care who knew it. The other men at the table shifted. Uncomfortable. Not stupid. They felt it. The weight dropping into the room like a stone into water. Something had just changed. Bumpy stood, slowly, the way a man stands when he's already decided. He didn't look at Luciano, didn't look at the money, just walked to the door, and left. Bumpy Johnson didn't run Harlem the way other men ran territory. He didn't need soldiers on every corner, didn't need his name painted on buildings, didn't need to remind people who he was. They already knew. By 1947, Bumpy had done something most black men in America couldn't even imagine. He'd taken power in a world designed to crush him and made it permanent. Numbers, protection, policy. The entire underground economy of Harlem moved through his hands or with his permission. But that wasn't what made him untouchable. What made him untouchable was trust. The grocer on 145th Street paid Bumpy not because he was afraid. He paid because Bumpy made sure his store didn't get robbed. The preacher on Lenox Avenue didn't cross Bumpy because of threats. He didn't cross Bumpy because the church basement flooded last winter and Bumpy had it fixed in 3 days. No cameras, no press, just fixed. That's power the Italians never understood. They thought power came from fear, from violence loud enough to echo, from making examples. Bumpy knew better. Power came from being necessary, from being woven so deep into the fabric of a community that pulling him out would unravel everything. So when Lucky Luciano sat down at that poker table, he wasn't just sitting across from another criminal. He was sitting across from Harlem itself. There were rules, unspoken but absolute. The Italians controlled downtown, the Irish held the docks, the Jews ran certain trades, and Bumpy Johnson owned Harlem. Not in partnership, not as a lieutenant, not as someone who needed permission, owned. The Italian families had learned this the hard way over the years. They'd tested him, pushed borders, sent men who didn't come back the same way they left, not dead, just changed, respectful. Even the commission, the 5 families who carved up New York like a Christmas turkey, they didn't touch Harlem without talking to Bumpy first. That was the arrangement. That was the peace. Luciano knew this. He'd been part of building it. So when he slid that extra card off the bottom of the deck, when he moved those chips toward himself with that wolf smile, he wasn't just cheating at poker. He was saying Bumpy didn't matter. He was saying the rules didn't apply. He was saying Harlem was just another neighborhood, and Bumpy was just another black man he could rob at a card table and walk away clean. In any other room, with any other man, maybe that works. Maybe you cheat, you win, you laugh about it over drinks the next week. But this wasn't any other room, and Bumpy Johnson wasn't any other man. Luciano had just made the most expensive mistake of his life. He just didn't know it yet. The door closed behind Bumpy. Quiet. Final. Inside the room, the remaining men didn't move, didn't speak. The kind of silence that feels like pressure in your ears. Luciano lit a cigarette. Casual. Like nothing had happened. "He'll get over it," he said. Nobody answered. They knew better. By the time Bumpy reached the street, 3 people already knew what happened. By the time he got to his car, a dozen more. Harlem had a nervous system, invisible, faster than phones, a network of barbers and waitresses, doormen and cooks, drivers and street cleaners, people who saw everything and said nothing to outsiders. But to Bumpy, they said everything. The word went out the way it always did, not loud, not dramatic, just true. Luciano cheated him. That's all it took. 4 words that moved through Harlem like wind through leaves. Barbershops heard it. Pool halls heard it. The after-hours clubs where musicians played until sunrise. They heard it too. And everyone who heard it understood exactly what it meant. This wasn't about money. Money you could lose. Money you could make back. This was about respect. And respect, in Harlem, in Bumpy's Harlem, was the only currency that actually mattered. Bumpy went home, didn't make calls, didn't summon anyone, didn't give orders. He sat in his apartment on Edgecombe Avenue and read the newspaper, front to back, slow. His wife, Mamie, watched him from the kitchen doorway. "What happened?" she asked. "Poker game," Bumpy said. Didn't look up. She waited. "Luciano cheated me." Mamie went still. She understood what that meant, what it would cost. "What are you going to do?" Bumpy turned the page. Calm, like he was reading about weather in a city he'd never visit. Nothing. That's when she knew it was serious. Across town, in the back room of a club on Mulberry Street, Luciano's men started to notice things. Small things. The bartender who usually smiled didn't smile. The numbers runner who came by every Thursday didn't come by. The cop they paid every month suddenly couldn't be reached. Doors that used to open stayed closed. Phone calls that used to get returned went silent. One of Luciano's lieutenants, a man named Sal who'd worked Harlem connections for 5 years, made his usual rounds. Came back 2 hours later, pale. "What?" Luciano asked. "Nobody's talking to me." "What do you mean nobody's talking?" "I mean nobody. Not the policy banks, not the protection routes, not even the bartenders. They see me coming, they look away, like I'm invisible." Luciano stubbed out his cigarette. "It's been 2 hours. I know. He hasn't done anything. I know." Sal leaned forward, quiet, the way men talk when they're scared but don't want to show it. "Boss, that's the problem." Harlem was watching, not with anger, not with violence, with something worse. Patience. The kind that doesn't rush, doesn't need to. The kind that waits for gravity to do its work. And Bumpy Johnson, he was gravity. Hour 1. Luciano left the poker game confident. Why wouldn't he be? He'd won. Clean exit. Money in pocket. The other players dispersed into the New York night like smoke. He went back to his suite at the Waldorf, poured a drink, expensive scotch, the kind that tastes like victory. His phone rang. Meyer Lansky, Luciano's oldest friend, his partner, the man who'd helped him build the commission, who'd stood beside him through wars with Maranzano, through the restructuring of the entire American underworld. "You cheated Bumpy Johnson at cards? Not hello, not how are you, just that." Luciano laughed. "It's poker, Meyer, it's what you do." Silence on the other end, the kind that feels like judgment. "Lucky, you don't cheat Bumpy Johnson." "Why? He's going to what? Start a war over 15 grand? He's Black, Meyer. He runs numbers in Harlem. You run nothing in Harlem," Lansky said, quiet, firm. "He does, and you just told him he doesn't matter." The line went dead. Luciano stared at the phone, poured another drink. Hour 2. 3 more calls came in. First was Frank Costello, the Prime Minister, the diplomat of the underworld, the man who smoothed every conflict, negotiated every peace. Fix it, Costello said. Tonight. Now. I don't care how. Frank, it's a card game. It's not about cards. It's about what you said when you dealt from the bottom. You said he's beneath you. You said the rules don't apply. Every black operator from here to Chicago is watching what happens next. You think they're going to keep working with us if we can just cheat them at a table and walk away. Second call was Vito Genovese. Ambitious. Dangerous. The kind of man who smiled when he smelled blood in the water. You're on your own with this one, Lucky. That was all he said. The third call came from someone Luciano didn't expect. Joe Bonanno. Old school. Traditional. Sicilian to his bones. My father taught me something, Bonanno said. He said you can take a man's money. You can take his territory. You can even take his life. But you never take his respect. Because respect isn't something you can give back. Joe, I appreciate the advice, but I'm not giving you advice. I'm explaining why nobody's going to help you. You disrespected a man the entire underworld respects. That makes you the problem, not him. Click. Luciano stood at the window of his suite, looking down at Park Avenue. 47 stories up. The city spread below him like a kingdom. His kingdom. Except it wasn't. Not all of it. Not the parts that mattered right now. Hour 3. The knock on the door came at 2:47 a.m. Luciano opened it. His driver, out of breath, eyes wide. We need to leave. Now. Leave? Leave where? The city. Mr. Luciano, please, I got a call. From a friend. From someone who knows. He said if you're still in New York by sunrise. He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't have to. Luciano looked past him, down the hallway. Empty. Quiet. But it didn't feel empty. It felt like the walls were closing in. He'd built an empire on reading situations, on knowing when to push and when to fold, on understanding power. And right now, every instinct he'd honed over 30 years was screaming the same thing. You don't have power here. You never did. Bumpy Johnson hadn't made a threat, hadn't sent a message, hadn't needed to. The city itself had turned, and Luciano finally understood. He wasn't running from violence. He was running from inevitability. Get the car, he said. The car pulled away from the Waldorf at 3:15 a.m. No convoy, no protection. Just Luciano, his driver, and one suitcase, the most powerful mobster in America, running in the dark. Park Avenue was empty. Streetlights cast long shadows. The city looked the same as it always did at this hour. Beautiful, cold, indifferent. But it wasn't the same. Luciano could feel it. The way you feel a storm coming before the first drop of rain. They drove south, toward the docks. A boat waited there. Private, fast. The kind you use when you don't want records. No one followed them. That was the part that made it worse. No cars tailing. No gunmen positioned on corners. No ambush waiting at red lights. Nothing. Just the empty streets and the sound of the engine and the crushing weight of understanding that he'd misjudged everything. Bumpy Johnson hadn't needed to chase him, hadn't needed soldiers or guns or threats. He just needed to be who he was. And Luciano, Lucky Luciano, the man who'd killed Joe Masseria, who'd created the commission, who'd reorganized the entire American mafia into a business instead of a war, had blinked first. At the docks, 2 men waited by the boat. They didn't speak, didn't ask questions, just loaded the suitcase and untied the ropes. Luciano stood on the pier for a moment, looking back at the city. His city, except it wasn't. Not completely, not the way he'd thought. He'd built an empire on knowing everyone's price, on understanding that every man could be bought, threatened, or broken. But Bumpy Johnson didn't have a price, not one Luciano could pay. Because Bumpy's power didn't come from violence or fear or money. It came from being necessary, from being woven into the community so deeply that removing him would tear the fabric itself. You can't buy that. You can't threaten it away. You can only respect it. And Luciano hadn't. The boat pulled away from the dock at 4:02 a.m. By the time the sun rose over Manhattan, Lucky Luciano was gone. He left behind business interests worth millions. territory that had taken decades to secure, connections that couldn't be rebuilt overnight. He left behind his pride. And somewhere in Harlem, in an apartment on Edgecombe Avenue, Bumpy Johnson was having breakfast. He hadn't made a phone call, hadn't given an order, hadn't lifted a finger. He'd just been still, and the world had moved around him. That's power. Not the kind that shouts, the kind that doesn't have to, the kind that makes the most dangerous man in America disappear into the night without ever saying his name. The story spread. Not in newspapers, not in police reports, not in any official record that historians would later find. It spread the way truth spreads in the underworld, quietly, carefully, from one man who knew to another who needed to know. Luciano cheated Bumpy at cards. 3 hours later, he was gone. That's all anyone said. But everyone understood what it meant. In Harlem, it meant something specific. It meant that respect wasn't just a word people threw around. It was currency. It was structure. It was the difference between a neighborhood and chaos. Bumpy hadn't defended himself with violence. He'd defended himself with certainty. The certainty that when you disrespect a man who's earned what he has, who's built what he's built, who's kept his word when keeping it cost him, the world notices, and the world acts. Not because he demands it, because he's worth it. For the Italian families, the lesson was different. They'd always seen Harlem as something separate, something lesser, a neighborhood they could do business with but never truly had to respect. One poker game changed that. Not through war, not through bloodshed, through something more powerful, through the simple, devastating reality that Bumpy Johnson didn't need their permission to have power. He just had it. And power that doesn't ask for permission is the only kind that lasts. Years later, after Bumpy was gone, after the streets had changed and new names held sway, old men would still tell the story. The poker game where Lucky Luciano made a mistake. Not a big mistake, not a dramatic one. Just the kind of mistake that reveals what's really true. He thought he could cheat Bumpy Johnson and walk away. He was wrong, and in being wrong, he taught everyone watching the most important lesson the underworld ever learns. Respect isn't given. It's not demanded. It's not bought. It's demonstrated. One card at a time. One decision at a time. One moment of restraint that says more than 1,000 threats ever could. Bumpy Johnson never needed to raise his voice. The silence was enough.